Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this month's Bookblast Translation Book Club at Hatchards in Piccadilly, at which we are featuring Lovers of Franz K by Burhan Sönmez, translated from the Kurdish by Sami Hejel. It is published by Open Borders Press. And they have a wonderful list, so do go and look at openborderspress.co.uk, I believe. It's a very interesting one, this, because it starts a bit like a sort of detective story, but then it becomes an interrogation, and then it becomes, really, it's all about literary legacy and how you respect the wishes of a dead author or not. So what happens is it kicks off with Ferdy Kaplan is arrested in 1968 in West Berlin for shooting a 20-year-old student at a bus stop and seriously injuring an elderly man. So Kommissar Müller's interrogation of Kaplan about his motives evolves as a series of mind games as they both spar in a mental representation of conflict. And ultimately, as I said, it's anything but a typical crime novel. It's really, in the end, an interrogation about whether Max Brod, who is the elderly gentleman at the bus stop, whether he was right or wrong for not burning Kafka's manuscripts. And it turns out that he was actually the aim. Kaplan wanted to kill him because he didn't respect Kafka's wishes and burn his manuscripts. And then also how the narrative is written, it's all mirrors sort of Kafka's own style. There's contradictions and it's very. I found it very cleverly done, but it is quite
head fry.
Head fry. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. It's a head fry. So, and then also, what is interesting is he writes it in Kurdish because Burhan Sönmez has had about 6 novels published in English now.
It's a 6, yeah.
Yeah, and he won the EBRD prize for Istanbul, which I believe, actually, I think it was Saki who published that, wasn't it? I think. But this is in Kurdish. So this is also, there's a whole thing about how your mother tongue's way of storytelling influencing your literature, and then how you recreate another language, so there's translation and translation. Anyway, so.
I really enjoyed it. How Kafka wants to be remembered is not how his friend Max Brod initially thought he should be remembered, which I...
Well, the interrogation thing, what interested me is also Sönmez, of course, he was at one point arrested and interrogated. He was in Turkey, and it was a demonstration of Kurdish activists, I believe, and he was arrested and imprisoned. So he has actually had, and I think he was beaten up, wasn't he?
He was tortured.
He was tortured. That's right. Yeah, he was tortured. That's right. Yes, Clem works for the publisher, so she knows. So tell us that he was tortured. What you know.
Yes, well, they held him for quite a while. It was out of that Istanbul came, because the prisoners would tell each other stories to try and escape from what was happening to them. They'd walk around Istanbul in their imaginations. And eventually he managed to get refugee status in England, but he was terribly affected by everything that had happened to him, as you might expect.
As a result, yeah.
He couldn't even read for a year, let alone write. And it was after that he started writing his first novels.
Right, yeah. And he's now based in Cambridge, I believe. Yeah, where he's. Yeah. Back to this, he knows. I mean, interrogation techniques and torture, they of course do play mind games. And then of course Kafka in his writing, that's his great thing. He does in his, in some of his other books, The Trial, of course, and some of his other books, again, it's all to do with mind games and perceptions and all of that. So I was wondering to what extent that influenced his, it is very painful. It's painful and convincing, this
and there's quite a few, true elements of it, aren't there? Quite a lot from Max Brod, really.
Well, the Max Brod thing is interesting because, of course, if he had burnt everything, we wouldn't have had half the Kafka books we have. Because I think, he saved, I think it was The Trial. And as I'm a literary executor, so I know you have instructions.
How much he's edited it,
Well, that's the thing.
Original kind. Yeah.
Exactly. If they tinkered with it, and
there
is that thing about updating, quote unquote, which people really not. No, you don't update. You leave it as it is. But then sometimes with language, I know there are some writers. I've always thought, I mean, of course she's huge and rather more the commercial crime, but something like Agatha Christie, you kind of wonder, because she was very much of her period.
Yeah.
Language is very of the period, and
Yeah,
you
well,
wonder...
10 Little Indians being a case.
It's that issue though, isn't it, of how much a writer wants to leave behind and what the traces are.
Well, I mean, you as a writer, because you've written a lot of amazing books.
All writing,
how would
the
you...
act of writing is to make one's thoughts, one's imagination, one's research public.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have a view of publication, the act of writing itself is an act of publication.
Yeah.
So then this issue becomes, well, the flip side of that then is then do you get to decide what's kept and what's not? These things have been on my mind because I've been reading Philip Terry's piece in this latest PNR, Poetry Nation.
Oh, yes.
Wonderful magazine. From his book, What is Poetry? And he's talking about exactly this issue in terms of Virgil. We wouldn't have the Aeneid because, and I'm working on Catherine Mansfield's letters, same thing.
Oh, Catherine Mansfield. Oh, yes.
Her husband, burn everything, make all fair. We wouldn't have anything. We would have this published, but we wouldn't have any of her notebooks or letters or anything. Yeah. But this issue of writing in itself, I've been thinking about, is an act of giving up to the world, actually.
Yeah.
Well, I always think a writer who says to somebody else to burn them, and I'm not thinking, well, no, you're just really passing the buck.
Yes.
If you really want to, but if you really want them to go, then burn them yourself, mate.
But
I mean, that's my view. You know, because you're really passing the buck to something. That's an incredible responsibility.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
He also died young. You know, I mean, I think there's a big difference between someone who at the age of 80 says and someone who, you know, and my understanding from this and from what I've read about Kafka in the past is that TB took him very quickly. He may have said that, but had he gone on to have children and wanted to leave them a legacy, it might have been a different kettle of fish. So, you know, I think that the condition that the person was in when he or she said, burn it all, makes a big difference.
How much of a fact that he asked Broad, not Dora, his partner.
Well, that's right. There was his partner.
I don't know what Dora did for a living, but Broad is a writer, and maybe I don't know. So maybe Kafka kind of maybe thought oh, this is someone who understands the kind of the predicament I'm in, and as you say, kind of passing.
Because when you say, if you are going to ask somebody to do it, you say, okay, then edit them, or because also as a literary executor, that I know there's also and that's more and more. A lot of people now for big names setting up foundations, but a lot of it is also to protect the image of the person, and that you can't control. How people perceive writers and artists and things, you can't really control that, because I know that from my godmother. Her husband of 18 years is absolutely huge in France, and I've been and sometimes done talks and things, and I realise people, they project all over the writer, dare I say. The writer's dead and fine. Yeah. But fine, not fine. But what I mean isn't that they become an icon and don't shoot the icons, But there's also, they project and you think, what on earth has this got to do with the writer? But back to you, Kirsty, you're saying
the relationship between the author and this subject matter. So, in a way, the author is generating materials himself, which is about this very thing of fugitive materials, if you like. That's an interesting idea to think about.
Because also something in here as well is this whole identity thing. Because Kafka, of course, at his time, wasn't he Jewish, writing at a time when there was a lot of anti-Semitism, if I'm right? And then Burhan Sönmez, he wrote this originally in Kurdish rather than Turkish. All his other novels are in Turkish. So there's also a whole thing about Turkish.
Ferdy's parents were Nazis.
This whole thing about identity and politics. And also how writers might be seen at the time and then later, so they might be huge at the time and then not, or they might be far less huge at the time and they're built up. This is all of that.
The author picked 1968? Is it because so much was going on in the Czech Republic and in France and the United States? Do you know, Claire?
The student protests in France.
Yep, 68 was huge.
Yeah. Okay, no.
That's right.
I'm fully aware of that, but that's
I know
specifically why you picked that point.
I think so, yeah.
And also because Max Brod was alive and died, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if he was writing about Max Brod, and
he couldn't have done it. What was the point after Brod?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, there's quite a lot of elements of, they mentioned UG Deutschke and other student, people that are at that, sort of real aspects of it, don't they?
Yes, he weaves in, and then there's some but then there's also this thing about the police and their violence.
The thing about Burhan in Kurdish is that he learned it as an oral language because it's suppressed in Turkey.
Right.
So he read his first book in Kurdish at the age of about 40, I think.
Wow.
And he had trouble reading it because he'd never seen it written out before.
And it's interesting in that Max Brod is instrumental in his, he wants to die, and he sets it up really in a really elaborate way, doesn't he, by writing these articles when he's in Tel Aviv and sending it to this magazine. So he's sort of got a death wish.
Sort of a literary suicide by Kafka fan.
He doesn't get killed. Yeah. And then there's also the twist where his executors don't do what he wanted either.
I wonder how often executors fully do what the person wants or not. I wonder. It's always rather a moot point. I mean, what happens if a major writer dies to all their Facebook and social media stuff, if they're on social media, or what happens to their emails? I mean, you're very young now, but I'm saying interested because you're a writer.
That very thing. But helped my university in Scotland achieve the Canongate archive, which was a big thing for the university, and I don't think actually they have.
And which university is it?
University of Dundee.
Oh, University of Dundee.
This is a long time ago. And I remember exactly that. And I remember there's this chilling phrase that's used, harvest the emails.
But then that's also selection.
But I found that very creepy.
That's very creepy.
In a way that just having letters and then making decisions about them wasn't quite the same.
Yeah.
Yes, because letters, people are actually, there were some very entertaining letters, I must admit, between Leslie Blanche and Nancy Mitford. Absolutely hysterical. No, the problem with letters is you want to see, if possible, to see both sides of the correspondence, and you don't always.
That, again, this act of writing itself is an act of some kind of, as I say, even if you have no intention of publishing, if it's just there for your bottom drawer, but at some point someone's going to come along and find those papers or do something with those emails or this material that's on a computer. This act of doing it somehow is to make something in the world that wasn't there before, and that then becomes something that somehow we all share, don't we?
Yes.
But is that also, because I've read also, there are arguments that writers, who was that about? Some writers, they are absolutely writing, to be published, but some not. And that's always the argument of things like diaries and even letters, because how you write a diary or how you write letters are the same. It's not, you don't necessarily expect it to be published.
Except
now, who was it, the diarist? No, there's a famous diarist who they really weren't. Some were written with an eye to being published and some not. Anyway.
I know, I was just thinking about our mutual friend Elisa.
Well, yes,
been
indeed.
Writing a diary all her life.
All her life, exactly.
Mother, and she must not, she cannot not write the diary. But the thing is, and it's the diary is for her, she's not doing it with any idea that she will go on and publish. No, but I was just going to say, I remember once she told me that whenever she's writing, she's aware that someone else may at some point
read it. There are diaries and diaries. Here we are. His will was like that of a lover who goes away saying, "Forget me," and yet has no desire ever to be forgotten. You see,
that was a beautiful line.
That is the thing, that what we were saying, do you really, that's why you pass the buck. So if you really, you would actually burn it. But maybe if you... and I've known other writers have. I know that the mother of a friend of mine, the mother before she died, did actually destroy a lot of private papers. The manuscript's fine, you leave the manuscripts, but a lot of private papers were destroyed. And you think, but she was part of all that Bloomsbury group. She wasn't actually, but she was associated with them So maybe there were things there were probably affairs and things alluded to in letters that she, or between, that she didn't want to. I don't know. You start imagining what might have been.
Well, I think there are two things
wonder,
going on. And I think one is about mortality.
Yeah,
because the minute you do that, you're confessing to yourself, well, I'm going to die. I need to leave my affairs in order. And this goes back to, in a way, what I said before, this idea that writing is a living thing. And it's very hard. Or maybe this is just something that people who love books and read and write think, that everything has this kind of charge to it.
Absolutely.
And it's very difficult just to give it the heave-ho.
Oh, absolutely. Very hard. Yeah, I mean, it's true. The words for me are like little creatures rushing across the page. They are living things. But that's I've grown up. I mean, books have always actually saved my life when I was growing up. Yeah. I was always a bit of a book addict, actually. So but it's true. It's really it's the writer who's talking to you through the words running across the page.
Yeah.
But
it would be like cutting off a finger. If you had to burn your own work, it would be gone and you could never get it back, and you've lost part of yourself. Yeah.
And it's an acknowledgement that somehow you are in control of that, but you don't ever want to acknowledge, because to acknowledge that would be to kill the freedom that the writer feels that she can do anything she wants.
Yeah. And if you ask somebody to burn them just before you die, you don't know whether they're going to burn them or not.
No.
In a way, it doesn't matter because you're dead, but on the other hand, you know, you haven't got you.
It is always quite a cruel thing.
And I find it hard to imagine that the literary executor would just go,
sure,
fine.
Sure, okay, I'll set it on fire.
Because obviously today we're not burning paper. It's about what's on a hard drive.
It's emails, you say harvesting.
Just say, because again, it sort of depends on the circumstances that the person was in when they wrote that part of their will.
That's true.
Were they compos mentis? Were they very ill? Or were they 50 and in perfectly fine health? But I can't imagine someone just saying, fine, she wanted us to destroy all the hard drives, all of the manuscripts that have been sent to anybody, to get rid of them.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of this episode of the Bookblast podcast, recorded live at our book club at Hatchards Piccadilly. Today we discussed Lovers of Franz K by Burhan Sönmez, translated by Sami Hejel and published by Open Borders Press. You can find the Bookblast podcast online at SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. If you enjoy the discussion, you can buy a copy of the book from our shop at bookshop.org.uk, and tickets to our future book club meetings are available via Eventbrite. We'd love to see you. For more information, visit us at bookblast.org. We'll be back soon. Until then, happy reading.